The intricate relationship between biblical genealogy and DNA patterns revealed in the Torah presents a fascinating re-examination of traditionally accepted family lines. Although Genesis 6:10 explicitly states that Noah had three sons, Shem, Ham, and Yopheth, a deeper analysis of genetic markers described in the Torah suggests a more complex reality behind these relationships. The Torah provides specific details about DNA patterns, particularly noting that both Yopheth and Seth possessed what's termed Elohim-type DNA, characterized by a YYX pattern. This shared genetic marker between Japheth and Seth becomes crucial in understanding the true nature of biblical lineages. The presence of this specific DNA pattern creates a genetic link that requires careful examination of traditional interpretations. The genetic narrative becomes even more intriguing when we examine the DNA patterns of key biblical figures. The Torah explicitly states that Noah, Abraham, Jacob, and Judah all carried the YYX-type DNA inherited from Seth's bloodline. This consistent genetic marker through these generations establishes a clear pattern of inheritance. However, this same pattern raises questions about Yopheth's place in the family tree, as his genetic markers suggest a different origin. The presence of these specific genetic markers challenges the traditional understanding of Yopheth's parentage. If Noah and his recognized line carried Seth's DNA pattern, and Yopheth showed different genetic markers, this strongly suggests that Yopheth may not have been Noah's biological son, despite being listed as such in the conventional narrative. A crucial revelation comes from the Torah's mention of Tubal-Cain's presence at the ark. The text indicates that Tubal-Cain was actually Yopheth's biological father, which explains the genetic variations observed. This detail adds a significant layer of complexity to the familiar story of Noah's Ark and its passengers, suggesting that the relationships among those aboard were more complicated than traditionally understood. The genetic connections extend further into later generations, with the Torah drawing distinct lines between different family branches. Specifically, Yopheth's DNA shows a clear association with Laban's lineage, while Jacob's DNA maintains its direct connection to Noah's genetic line. The mentioned separation of genetic markers provides additional evidence supporting the theory that Yopheth's biological heritage differed from his brothers. These genetic patterns have profound implications for our understanding of biblical family structures. While the surface reading of Genesis presents a straightforward father-son's relationship between Noah and the three brothers, the genetic markers described in the Torah reveal a more nuanced and complex family arrangement. The presence of different Y chromosome patterns indicates distinct paternal lineages that don't align with the simplified traditional interpretation. The specific YYX pattern, appearing consistently in multiple generations of Noah's recognized line through Seth, Abraham, Jacob, and Judah, establishes a clear genetic signature for this important biblical lineage. This consistent pattern serves as a genetic fingerprint that helps identify true descendants of this line and distinguishes them from other related but genetically distinct groups. The revelation about Tubal-Cain's presence at the ark and his biological connection to Yopheth adds another layer of complexity to the narrative. This genetic link helps explain certain aspects of later biblical stories and the development of different tribal identities. It suggests that the passengers on the ark represented a more diverse genetic pool than traditionally assumed. The connection between Yopheth's DNA and Laban's bloodline, contrasted with Jacob's genetic link to Noah, provides insight into the origins of later tribal divisions and relationships. These genetic differences may have influenced the development of distinct tribal identities and explain some of the tensions and alliances described in subsequent biblical narratives. The preservation of these genetic details in the Torah indicates their significance to ancient authors and audiences. These weren't random details, but served a specific purpose in establishing and verifying important lineages and relationships. The careful tracking of genetic patterns suggests a sophisticated understanding of heredity in ancient times. The implications of these genetic patterns extend far beyond the immediate story of Noah and his sons. They help explain subsequent tribal divisions, alliances, and conflicts described in biblical narratives. Understanding these genetic relationships provides valuable context for interpreting later events in biblical history and the development of distinct tribal identities. This analysis demonstrates the importance of examining biblical texts through multiple lenses, including genetic perspectives when such information is provided. The careful preservation of genetic markers in the Torah suggests these details were considered crucial for understanding family relationships and tribal identities in ancient times. The distinction between biological and social relationships in biblical narratives remains relevant for modern readers. This genetic analysis reminds us that ancient family structures could be complex, with legal and social bonds sometimes being as important as biological ones. The presence of different genetic markers helps explain the development of distinct tribal identities and the complex relationships described in later biblical narratives. The careful documentation of these genetic patterns in the Torah suggests that ancient authors understood the importance of genetic heritage in establishing legitimate lineages. This understanding helped maintain accurate records of important family lines and tribal associations, even when biological relationships differed from social or legal ones. Later, Shem bloodline manifested Israel's son Levi, and Ham bloodline manifested Abram's son Ishmael. But Judah identical Israel have Ham plus Shem YY bloodline. On the contrary, Yopheth's DNA is identical to Laban's DNA. This means Noah's DNA come from Seth's bloodline, then Yopheth's DNA is associated with Cain's bloodline. Jacob was 77 years old when received Isaac's blessing, and he worked 7 years to have Leah. Thus, Jacob was 84 years old when he married Leah, and 91 years old when he married Rachel. Genesis 31:43 illustrates Laban said, "The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children," which means after Jacob worked 7 years for Laban, Leah was already conceived by Laban's DNA. Then Laban postponed Rachel's marriage. Genesis 49:4 addressed Reuben mated with his father's wife, but did not mention Bilhah. Besides, Bilhah was maidservant for Leah, then Bilhah was not Jacob's wife. This means Genesis 49:4 addressed Rachel slept with Reuben. This means Reuben is not Israel's son. Then Rachel asked for Reuben's mandrake and became pregnant with Joseph. Then Joseph is not Israel's son. Genesis 35:18 illustrates, Israel interrupted Rachel upon assumed Benjamin was born due to son slept with father's wife, sin, as Benjamin is Judah's son. Rachel called Benjamin's name Ben-Aoni, son of disgrace, but Israel, due to Judah's DNA identical his DNA, called him Ben-Yomin, meaning abundant. Genesis 35:22 illustrates, Israel was informed about Reuben slept with Bilhah, many years after Bilhah gave birth to Naphtali. Genesis 49:17 prophesied Dan to harm toward Israelites. Then Dan had Laban's lineage, then Dan is Simeon's DNA, and Naphtali is Reuben's DNA. Genesis 49:19 prophesied Gad is identical Esau, Achab, opposite of Jacob, meaning Jacob and his brother Asher is yet inferior to Reuben's son Joseph. Then Esau, Simeon, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Dan, Naphtali, and Joseph. Each has Laban's Cain DNA. Esau is Laban's DNA, thus Rebekah desired Jacob obtain Isaac's blessing, since Rebekah knew Esau is not Isaac's DNA. There's difference between Torah text true meaning to what was translated as Bible accused toward Jacob as if participated in deceitful events to obtain Esau's blessing. Torah logic illustrates Isaac could only bless Jacob, otherwise Isaac's blessing over Esau would not be manifested. Torah categorized Seth's bloodline from Abraham's masculine descendants, including Ishmael, Isaac who begot Israel who begot Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah. Then Simeon, Reuben, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Joseph had Laban's DNA. Genesis chapter 49 prophesied fortunate, prosperous life for Levi, Judah, Zebulun, Issachar, Benjamin, but warned against Simeon, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Dan, Naphtali, and Joseph's DNA associated with Laban. Accordingly, history illustrates most northern tribes, despite Moshe's blessing, yet were destroyed, and only Israel's lineage remained, who represents Israelites today. The distinction between biological and social relationships in biblical narratives remains relevant for modern readers. This genetic analysis reminds us that ancient family structures could be complex, with legal and social bonds sometimes being as important as biological ones. The presence of different genetic markers helps explain the development of distinct tribal identities and the complex relationships described in later biblical narratives. The careful documentation of these genetic patterns in the Torah suggests the importance of genetic heritage in establishing legitimate lineages. This understanding helped maintain accurate records of important bloodline. Thank you for listening. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Until next time, keep questioning everything you think you know, and have a wonderful day.